Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lucia Gomez. I am your host today for Critica NYC. Really glad to be with all of you here today. We have a part two of a segment that we started off, in the last show, where we talked a little bit about the numbers, the census, what it actually means, and how it actually helps us either harness our power or just like soak in the reality that while the Latino community is growing ever so more in the city of New York, our power is definitely not inclusive of the magnitude of our size in total population. But we want to break that down a little bit, right? What does it mean to have a large segment of the population in our schools, in our workplaces, in our neighborhoods, in housing, amidst all the dynamics that are happening, that have been happening in our communities for decades. And what that means when we begin to talk about the halls of power, the tables, elected office, and the different leadership roles that help us push our communities forward. And so with us today, we have Eli Valentin, who joins us once again in our part two segment of this conversation around census and power. And Eli, I know, a couple of weeks ago, when we started this conversation, we were still trying to figure out, well, who's going to be the next lieutenant governor, right? Mm-hmm. And we were contemplating the fact that with the lack of Latinos in state government, more like in leadership roles within state government, as well as in city governments, in elected posts within these governments, and I would say even in high positions of policymaking roles as well. We were hoping that, that we would be taken seriously as a possibility for appointing a Latino lieutenant governor, the first Latino lieutenant governor. So why don't we shape the conversation a little bit around where we left off last time, which is, well, we actually left off last time about the next city council speaker. But let's kick it off on the conversation around where we are right now with the lieutenant governor, right? Who is it? It wasn't a Latino, right? And then we'll talk a little bit about the state of, kind of affairs. And welcome, Eli. Thank you.
No, thank you for having me, Lucia. Such a pleasure. So
let's talk a little bit about lieutenant governor, right? The fact that it's not a Latino, right?
Yeah. So, well, obviously, in one sense, I was disappointed. I have met Brian Benjamin before on several occasions. I know him from those settings. I've known him as a good person. And so this has nothing to do with Brian Benjamin, who will be the next lieutenant governor. But I was disappointed that Latinos, again, have been left out of the equation. I think, as you well pointed out in your introduction, that Latinos, we're not just the future anymore, right? We've always been spoken of as that sleeping giant, right? I think in many ways we are here. The numbers bear it out. But that hasn't meant, as you well pointed out, that has not meant empowerment. It hasn't meant representation, not just for the sake of it, but because, I think that our leadership should reflect the reality on the ground. So in that sense, I was disappointed. I thought that there were very capable Latinos that would have served in this position well, but also it would have helped Kathy Hochul in her reelection efforts. The fact is that at the end of the day, this was a political calculation. This is not necessarily a critique, right? This is just a postulation. It's a position that she took. She felt that having an African-American, she felt would help her in her reelection efforts. But my position is, a Latino too. You need Latinos to be part of a winning coalition in the state of New York. So I'm disappointed, very disappointed.
So, I know we spoke about this, and I think through a little bit. We have Kathy Hochul, first woman governor of the state of New York, has an opportunity to make an appointment that, for the Latino community would be significant because of our lack of representation city, statewide, right? And it's an appointment. It wouldn't necessarily be an election as of now. It would be to fulfill her role as she stepped up to governor, right? And now we have Senator Brian Benjamin, senator from Harlem, becoming the lieutenant governor, not the first African-American lieutenant governor. Governor Patterson, was lieutenant governor, and kind of the same scenario that happened to Kathy, to Governor Hochul is happening again, where, governor steps down, however, in whatever way that happens. But the reality is that we still don't have an attorney general who's Latino, a controller who's Latino. We do have the Secretary of State, who is Latina and who has been Latino. I kind of feel like they've saved that space for a Latino. It's sort of like an appointed, not elected. Other states have elected Secretary of State, but this is an appointed position. So we do have, kind of that role. And in the past, ceremoniously, we've had some roles within appointments in commissionerships and, different roles in state government. Why is it important to even talk about this? Why is it even critical that this is such a big deal that there is or there isn't, right? Like, why is that a conversation starter?
I believe representation matters, and it matters because in order to fulfill the needs of the people, you need people to understand their plight, right? You need people to understand their condition, and who better to understand the condition of communities, right? If you don't have someone that actually lives those experiences. So I think it's a matter of representation, but representation is important precisely because you need folks that really get it, that really understand it. And in the case of Latinos, I mean, we are a power when it comes to numbers, not in the actuality of power. In terms of numbers, we're there. And it's important, therefore, to have enough representation at all governmental levels that really understand what is happening to them. And that's why representation is important.
Now, we've allowed this to happen, though.
Yes.
As a community, as a, concentrated demographic of both voters and our political leadership and our, representatives of government, as well as in different elected posts, right, that voice their concerns for us. We've allowed this. We've allowed Latinos not to have a representative, someone voicing our concerns at the table, breaking the table, however people want to discuss about it these days. We've allowed that to be the case, right? And we haven't necessarily dwindled when it comes to our voices in the state Senate, in the state assembly, right? Regardless if we're not, the speaker of the assembly, or we're not the Senate majority leader, right? Both African American, we have some very vocal voices in the state Senate and the state assembly, but leadership ultimately matters, right? Yeah. And it used to be where we used to say that, I want my daughter and my children to see someone that looks like them. So, the reality is that we have much more diversity than we've ever had before, right? But what makes you think, what makes you kind of, play out why we've allowed this? Like, why as a community have we allowed this to play out throughout the decade, right? Because essentially it's been a product of the last decade.
Yeah. I think part of it, and I said something similar 2 weeks ago with you, I think part of it is self-inflicted as well. In other words, we need to have folks, and here I speak about political leadership. We need to have folks that are driven not by personal agendas, but we need folks that will develop truly a people agenda, right? That really are attuned to the needs of the people and and to serve those needs. So I think part of it is folks have been driven by personal agendas. And then the other thing is, Latinos, is often said, it's almost a cliche now that Latinos are not a monolith, right? We don't all look the same. We're as black as Sammy Sosa used to be, right? but also as white as Christina Aguilera, right? And the same goes in terms of our culture, even our accents, right? We could speak Spanish, but accents are different, even, right? Nuances are different. And that diversity, which is rich, which is beautiful, right? I think it's representative of who we are, and that's a beautiful thing. But it has often gotten in the way of unity, not uniformity, right? But unity within our people. And therefore, cliques have developed, right? I'm going to go for these folks. I'm going to go for these folks, when we really should be looking at each other as people that are suffering the same plight. I think part of it has been self-inflicted. We have been our own enemies when it comes to political leadership. And when that happens, the only ones that suffer are our people, are the Doña Felas and the Doña Tomas, that are neighbors and that, are out there.
And part of this, right, Eli, is that you and I can probably have like hours of conversation. I am dying to chart up a map and do a power analysis. We'll get to that one day. But the reality is that, why does this even matter? I mean, and we talked about people that look like us, right? But can you give us a little, just, think through a little bit with me of the picture of where we are right now as a community, the kinds of voices or the issues that are resonating right now front and center, whether it's national or locally, that really people should consider. Who are their spokespeople? Who are the people that are speaking up for them? Right. So some of the issues that you may want to highlight, right? Anything that stands out right away for you?
I always think about bread and butter issues, right? Sometimes I think folks complicate stuff, and we shouldn't, because at the end of the day, I'm going to mention our Doña Fela and Don Tomas again. At the end of the day, they want to eat, right? They want food on their table. They want to pay their Con Ed bill. They want to pay their rent. And I think that our efforts should be driven by making that a possibility, so that they don't have to struggle, right? So when I think about these issues, especially in light of COVID-19, I think about economic empowerment, right? There are folks that have lost jobs during this time, that have not been able to gain them back. And it is our people, Latinos especially, have suffered the brunt of this. And when we look at statistics, we see that it is always Latinos and African Americans that are at the bottom tiers of the economic ladder. This has been the case historically. And so I think the first issue I would bring up is this economic empowerment, which then translates into other things, right? It means job equity. It means jobs, right? It means affordability. Affordable housing is something that is critical for our folks here on the ground. So I when I think about this, I think about bread and butter, right? People want a good roof over their head. How can we make that happen? People want to pay for that roof. How do we make that happen? So I think right now, our leaders should work on ensuring that we make a path available so that our folk don't struggle. Because at the end of the day, it's about that.
Right. So we're in the middle of a pandemic still, right? Still talking about a variant, still having debates about whether masks work or don't work, whether or not, who has a vaccine, who doesn't. I'm all for getting vaccine, got it as soon as I could. And the reality is that we're about to enter schools, right? Our schools are going to open up. People have to get back to work, and many of them, there's an anticipation of like getting back in September, right? Some people, quickly right after Labor Day, next week, we will see them. We will see the city much more robust. We're hoping, right? Many more people. Well, some people, right? And I'm curious, and I'm curious to see the data still of how many of people working from home are Latino versus, we already have heard some information about the fact that our essential workers, those workers that have not stopped working, que no tienen el lujo to stop working,
right.
have been out and about, and they have been, for the most part, people of color, Black and brown folks, Asian Americans, still, at some of the lowest wage type of jobs, whether it's supermarkets, even in our health and hospital system. We're still talking about cleaners and individuals in the construction industry, both union and non-union, right? Like, the reality is that our communities have not stopped. Many of them that have seen the health hardships, that the issues of economic hardships. We're going to see in September where pandemic unemployment pay is going to cease for many of these workers that have not been able to go back to work. The industries perhaps have not opened. Not every Broadway show is open. So those that clean the Broadway shows, those that are actors and actresses trying to make it. But I'm thinking through, the hotels where our workers, exist in their majority, the food service industry, right, Eli? I mean, so many of like what the plight is, if someone, it is not just someone who's lived our plight, right? Because in many ways, you can have a Latino who never had to live in NYCHA, who never had to collect food stamps or any kind of, public assistance. It's all, many times we talk about a class scenario, right? And how we help one another. But the fact still remains that when there is such a large electoral segment of our population, then the natural course of train of thought essentially is that we should be able to demonstrate some kind of political harness of our power, right? Harnessing our political power, and be able to elect someone that as a collective, as a demographic collective, that we've created some illusion, I want to say a little bit, that the full total Latino population has that person that they want to elevate at the in state government, in city government, right? But at the end and at the heart of all this is that there will be someone that is going to say, yes, that bill can reach the floor. Yes, that issue can be heard. Yes, I will champion that concern within state government. And the fact that we haven't decided as a community that that's important is what causes a little trouble in me. It causes me to like say, I want to continue to talk about this because I think people need to understand that it's that critical. Not just because we're the majority of the growing demographics, right? Of the people of color segment, we used to be a minority, but the fact that why can't we lead in a time of crisis? Why can't we, in fact, use our voices and harness that to represent everyone of a community? And that, honestly, Eli, is still, aside from the fact that, we're so diverse in our segments, is like still part of my concern of why we're allowing this of ourselves. Right?
Yeah.
And I'm not sure how, what do we say to our audience that is like, oh, this is the same, same day, same crap, another day, right? Same issues that we continue to talk about. But what can we do? What can, Doña Fela and Tomas, right? What can they do? How can they engage? How can they participate? Because essentially, you talk about a lot of people being, potentially good at this. And then some of us are like, there's no pipeline. Our pipeline is so thin that, substantively, how do we like all get behind this one individual, right? Or two individuals, or whatever the case is. So how do we increase that pipeline? How do we get more of our communities to start talking about this? What can folks begin to do?
You know, I think that civic engagement or civic education is so important, and it's missing, right? So I think part of it, I think there are two problems here. One is there's a civic education problem, uh, and then on the other hand, I think there's something called nihilism, and it's that just people have been so angered, frustrated by the errors of our so many political leaders, right? And I'm talking about ethical, legal errors,
Yes.
right? That, you know, corruption, we can't deny, right, that it's been a problem. I mean, look at, we have a new governor because the previous one was ethically challenged, and that's putting it lightly.
And he wasn't Latino, by the way.
And he wasn't Latino, right?
We've had enough of those in our lifetime.
Yes, exactly. And if we look, I mean, look, Elliot Spitzer, right? Another ethically challenged governor, and
also not Latino.
Another one, and that's really important to highlight, right? But so we have so much of that we have folks that are nihilistic, right? They're like, well, todos son así. They're all like that, right? So part of it is that. And then the other part is I think there's enough people out there that should be engaged. And I think this is where civic education comes in, because we don't have to succumb to that feeling that they're all like that. Hey, you know what? Get involved, but know the process so that you can be the change that you're looking for. But I think that there should be mechanisms put in place that can really educate our folks about, as you pointed out, Lucia, the importance of political leadership, right? Of those that say this bill is going to come before the floor, not that one, right? And to know how the process works, but also to know that there are things that we can do that can really hold these folks in positions of power accountable so that they truly serve us. But that entails civic education. So I think those two things are really important to tackle.
And I just want to, one of the fascinating things when we think of civic education, right, is that we all become knowing, right? We know that there is a certain, 150 assembly folks, there's 51 city council members, there's 52 community boards, probably things most people randomly don't know. It's stuff that we have to know, right? We know that there's a controller in the city and the state. We know that there's a public advocate in the city, not a public advocate in the state, but there's an attorney general in the state, not one in the city, right? Yeah. There's a mayor, and then there's, a governor, and the governor has a second, and the mayor has a bunch of, deputy mayors that they appoint. And so those are all possible positions of say, of somewhat power, but not elected power. So there's los políticos elegidos, right? Those elected by you, me, everyone else, right? Those register to vote. And then there are those that participate in the swaying or persuading or, highlighting of issues that are important to us. So all of those rungs of roles that people play in and out, right? Visible and sometimes not so visible, are all critical and all important. So, on a few levels, it's not enough to know about civics. It is important that what is it that you do when you know about civics, right? How do you use that knowledge to not just know it, learn it, right? Understand it, but how do you put that into play? And it rings to me like, how many of our folks are really on community boards? How many of because we passed legislation, I believe like 2 years ago, right? That is that expands the opportunity for folks to join community boards because the appointment process is a lot simpler. There's term limits to folks that are going to be on community boards. And so I think it's critical for us to highlight, well, what are some of the ways? And do you encourage any specific way, Eli? Right? Because I hate that even in their, synagogues, their churches, your houses of worship, there's leadership in those things, and they too participate in civic life. Can you suggest a couple of ways that people can engage, and some of the things that you've seen to be successful?
Yeah, I think the community boards are really great vehicles um, for action, right? But also knowledge of how governmental processes work, right? That being a small component of it. But community boards are really important, right? Because that's as local as government can get. And that's a great thing, right? One time we had school boards. Now we have something like it, but they're not. It's different, right? But the school governance law changed in 1999, or no, I'm sorry, 2003. So things changed, but there's still community education councils, right? That where parents can get involved and others can get involved in the local education policies. But I think it entails. You mentioned religious leadership. This is a work that must involve everyone, right? We're talking about community leaders, religious leaders. And I think at that level, there needs to be an understanding that involvement at that level is critical. And the more people that we get, the more powerful they can be, the more change it can affect in their lives. So I say, let's start there at that level where religious leaders, community leaders, which means, nonprofit leaders, folks that get involved at that level, they need to, I think we need to spark that up some more.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I can probably talk about a bunch of organizations that I'm a part of, right? That people can get activated. If you're like in East Harlem and the Bronx, you probably are involved in Community Voices Heard, or should be involved in Community Voices Heard, CVH, right? Or Make the Road in, Queens and Brooklyn and pretty much, statewide. Sometimes people don't, there is a lot of engagement locally by, people who are in the know. Most of the time, people engage with a trusted local neighborhood organization because they need something, right? We go there for a health clinic purpose or training or some, assistance with reading documents or filling out paperwork. But sometimes we don't know that a lot of times they're all hustling for the same kinds of services that they're providing the people that visit them. They are actually trying to ensure that they get those services by the funding that comes from state government, from city government, from our elected officials. And so, I want to challenge everyone who's like, has ever gotten any kind of assistance from a neighborhood organization, who's ever seen the signs or the block association parties or National Night Out or the Juan Pablo Duarte Festival in Upper Manhattan, right? All the street festivals. All these organizations do these things in order to engage the population, to engage you and I, to engage us sometimes in, trying to bring not just a good time to the neighborhood, but to take us away from the horrible times, to take us away from, poverty, and to give us an opportunity to go to job fairs, or give us an opportunity to learn a little bit more on how to purchase our first home, or, how to develop skills, English language skills, citizenship drives that get conducted. We also have a role to give back to those organizations.
Yeah.
And sometimes just asking, hey, how can I be of help? Some of these organizations do rallies, right? And call for things like the Excluded Workers Bill of Rights that got passed earlier this year to help all those workers that did not have access to pandemic assistance, that were not able to qualify for unemployment insurance and be at home and getting some kind of assistance. So, you mentioned, community boards, and we both mentioned them, right? Are amazing tools, but they're also, like you said, a good place to learn the process of government, right? A lot of our faith-based organizations that our participants work in, that they attend every, so often every week, is a great vehicle to get so many of us engaged with. They participate sometimes in these same outreach efforts with local officials, local electeds. I would encourage people to go out and do that, right? Talk to their pastors, talk to their, congregations and say, hey, how can we work with city council member A, assembly member B, senator this. I will guarantee that this leadership wants to be present, right? They do this all the time. I see it on their calendars, on their schedules, right? They do this all the time. I want to encourage some of the folks that are viewing us to take a step in that direction, right? To engage, to talk about the issues that are happening in their neighborhoods. Now, tell me a little bit about actual, like, who moves the pendulum at the end of the day in who gets appointed or who gets elected, right? Because I feel like the voters and us voting as a collective has a lot to do with why we did not get, an appointment in lieutenant governor, post, or potentially even not have a possible candidate for for a mayoral candidate, even though we had, Morales, who ran and did not get a large number. But why don't you give me a little bit of how this gets, how people should understand this plays out? Because it's not like just politica as usual. It's not like 5 people in a room, even though I'm sure that still happens. But on election day or many, many months before, how does this play out? How do we get a Latino candidate? How do we get people to actually be feasible enough to run and win?
I think I said self-inflicted wounds that we've created ourselves. I think about we say it, right, Lucia? We, like, Latinos are now the largest, in terms of voting demographic, the largest ethnic group in the state of New York. We are it now. But yet, when we factor in who actually goes and votes, we are not the largest, right? So I think that, and sometimes we get frustrated. Oh, this is the person I wanted to be or to represent me. But, if we ask, hey, did you vote? No, I forgot, right? So I think we do it to ourselves in many ways by not seeing the importance of voting. Part of it is nihilism. Again, people are frustrated. My vote is not going to really make a difference at the end of the day. But it does make a difference when we right, collectively count. Mm-hmm. The more we come out, the more powerful we become, right? The more important it is, like, when there's strength in numbers. That is a cliche, but think about it, right? If there are so many of us that go to the polls, how would it be possible for a lieutenant governor not to consider a Latino for the lieutenant governor position, right? It needs to get to the point where folks will say, hey, I cannot be elected without Latinos, right? So, but that can only happen when we ourselves see the importance of exercising our voice by actually voting. And I think that when that happens, I think things will begin to shift, right? Our governors will say, hey, we need to have more commissioners in key roles. Or our mayor will need to say, hey, I need to have a deputy mayor that's Latino, because guess what? I need them for re-election. If that doesn't happen, then we're going to be left out of the equation. We're not even going to be at the table. So I think part of it is we need to see the importance that we need to vote, because in that vote, there's a voice.
And Eli, some of us, right, after an election, whether it's an exit poll, right, that some organizations might conduct, or there's an analysis as soon as the numbers come out, because sometimes people don't understand in the back end, right, behind the scenes, there's this master database that has your name, has your address, has your phone number, has your email if you've given it out, or if you put it down on your voter registration form. Once you give that information out when you register to vote, it is public information. So heads up, folks, if you've gotten those calls and you've gotten tons of calls, it's because you're a solid voter and people want to persuade your vote. And now that there's been so much money handed out during the city council races as a result of the matching funds, well, I'm sure people got annoyed, and I heard tons of it, where many more people got calls and mail and tons of paper and tons of, ads that popped up when they were watching Netflix, right? Like the reality is that there's so much more possibilities for communication with the electorate that there's no excuse. There really is no excuse that you don't know that there's an election coming up. Yeah. You've chosen not to engage at that level. And I'm just saying, if you're not going to engage on the electoral side, and even though I'm all saying 100% you should, people know that you don't engage on the electoral side. And there's a small segment, very tiny segment, of those that do advocacy, those that do outreach, those that, want to civically engage, that will reach out to you. And then there's a much larger segment that doesn't even care what you have to say because you don't say it. You don't engage. You don't have that kind of thought that your opinion, your voice matters, or you believe that because you spoke, everything you said was right. And therefore, an elected official is going to take that into advice and pass a law immediately to follow through. And I think there's an element of cynicism, right? That, they don't care. I don't, no one gives a crap of what we, have to say. But there's a reality that not everything you say is good for everyone in a neighborhood. And many times, our elected officials have to think, beyond, one voice, but in collective and in mass, we can make huge amounts of change. Now, there's an election coming up next year. And even before that, we have a huge process in like 2 weeks. I'm waiting for the maps, right? September 15th, we're going to see the way in which the Redistricting Commission, the Independent Redistricting Commission of the state of New York, which is that commission charged with redistributing the population in a way that would allow all communities to be heard, in being able to elect their representative, divvy out the population. New York City saw a huge increase, 8-point-something million people now in the city of New York alone, right? Fueled the entire state's population. So we need the power. We want to make sure we have enough Senate seats, enough Assembly seats that voice our concern, because many times, especially in state politics, we have to figure out what the rest of the state cares about. Obviously, right? It's a state issue. So Long Island, upstate, right? Westchester County, they all those representatives look out for the interests of their neighborhood. So New York City really does need to have a significant portion of the say or an opportunity to have a large voice. And we're going to see this redistricting process play out, right? Can you like outline for us what the next couple of months may look like in terms of state elections 2022, and then things that people can look forward to in 2023? Because we already know what's happening, right? It's a calendar. It's set in law and it's set in stone. So do you want to outline that for us a little bit so folks get a gist of what they should be looking forward to?
Well, so the redistricting, as you say, the redistricting process is going to be so important. And in our private conversations, we both mentioned the importance of this is that the ramifications of redistricting is how they reapportion the lines of right, who represents us. The implications of this are for a whole decade, right? So this process takes place every 10 years after the census is taken and the numbers produced and released. Then that's how these lines get redrawn. And whatever happens and whatever gets approved at the end of the day is the state legislature, then that will determine how the next 10 years is going to look. So that's why it's important to see what's going to happen and to make sure that there's proper representation at all levels, right? Now, that will mean what's going to happen next year as we re-elect as we go again to the polls to re-elect or not who our current leaders are in the state assembly, in the state senate, and even who our next governor, lieutenant governor, state comptroller, state attorney general,
and our congressional folks, right? And as well as Senator Schumer has a re-election next year as well. So U.S. Senator. So there's like the U.S. Senate seat, the governor's race, and the lieutenant governor, right? We still have our attorney general's open seat, not open. She's still the attorney general, the controller, right? State Senate, state assembly. And then we have a bunch of special elections that are, coming up. Once Senator Benjamin becomes lieutenant governor, that opens up Senator Benjamin's seat in Harlem as an open seat for a special election. Right. Then, Assemblywoman Carmen de la Rosa becomes after November's election, we hope to see her become the next city council woman in District 10. So that seat will have a special in Upper Manhattan. There's another seat. The
Victor Pichardo, who recently stepped down. So that's going to be another special election as well in the Bronx. That's the West Bronx.
Yes, and Assemblyman Charles Barron will become our council member again, and so that will open up another assembly seat in the Bronx. So there's some activity prior to the June election of 2022 that people should pay attention to, because it will show the new changes to the map. So someone who you thought was your representative, both congressional or at the state level, may no longer be that person, especially if you live so close to a line that needs to be moved. So folks should be alerted to that. And then next year, there will be city council redistricting. And yet before city council redistricting, come January, we'll have an entire new class of majority female city council. A hugely diverse city council, more diverse than I think we've kind of ever seen. I mean, I think there's about 14 Latinos, diverse in who they are. I think it's like a good 50-50 between Dominicans and Puerto Ricans. But then we have a Colombiana, we have a half Panamanian, an Ecuatoriano, right? So there's a mix of council members, and then we'll have our second Black mayor, right, in the history of the city of New York. And that person's got to appoint all his people come January, right? Is there a role for folks that are watching? Is there a role for anyone who's not like in el medio, in the inner circle? Is there something that folks could be doing to kind of begin to prepare for, the issues that are going to be taken up? Is there anything you suggest?
Well, I think involvement, the first thing is being aware that all this is happening, right? And here, as you were talking, Lucia, I all I kept thinking was, I've always hoped for folks to understand the importance of leadership at the local level, right? Because there's often a misunderstanding. There are things that for instance, our city council members determine, right? It could be, how high the new building structure that's going to be built next door to you, how high that's going to be, right? Whether a new mall is going to be built, 5 blocks away from you, and what that's going to mean for your kids that go to school right across the street, right? That doesn't get decided by the President of the United States. Doesn't get decided by your U.S. Senator necessarily. It gets decided by who your council member is. It gets decided by your, the mayoral administration, who's involved in that. So there's so many things that get decided by our local leaders, and it's important that we have an understanding of how important that is. Because I think once people realize how important that is, they will have no problems voting in a November 2021 election compared to the November 2020 election, right? Because stuff happens at the local ground that is so important. So I think, again, information is important, and to understand that these local elections and the local processes play such an important role in what happens even around our corner, outside of our street, right? So I think that is critical. It is really critical to really get involved and immersed in that part, because that affects our day to day even more so than other things that happen at the federal level.
Yeah, and I can't help but talk about the fact that all of our communities, either they work somewhere, right? They have an employer, or perhaps they are an employer and they have employees. So I would say your workplace is a place of influence, or a place that you can help bring change, depending on your circumstances. Where you live has either an association or a block association, or perhaps there's a senior center nearby, or a rec site, or a
Yeah.
faith-based organization. Those are all spaces that our policymakers and our elected officers look to for some kind of guidance as to what a neighborhood and what a community is going through. So if you live wherever you live, you are part of the civic conglomerate of that particular neighborhood. And let's not get it twisted. Like, your numbers, whether or not you turn out, whether or not, there's, stores closed up, boarded up, is there going to be a business improvement district opened up in that area? Are they going to revitalize using X, Y, and Z method? All of that is already being talked about, already being discussed by your elected person or the person to be. I am big on people saying, don't lose out. Don't miss out on giving your opinion, on saying something. Go to your local council member's office right now, tomorrow, pick up the phone and just call and ask. Anything I should be aware of, anything coming up? There's a bunch of back to school fairs where book bags are being handed out, free books, free pencils. I mean, the city is able to do so many things, and these electeds, because not everybody participates.
Yes.
Let's be clear. If everyone busted open all the doors and all the opportunities that exist out there, there wouldn't be enough. But that means that they need to create more. And we need to let people know that we exist, because if not, there will just continue to be a small pie to divide instead of increasing that. Right. So I would say, we have workers. If you're a parent, a stay-at-home parent, which there aren't many, but I'm sure there are, you have an opportunity to participate in your community education councils, right? Your CECs. Apply, right? If you, want to check out a community board, you don't have to be a community board member, but you can participate in their numerous committees, their housing committee, their education committee, right? They can participate in those committees, even though they're not appointed, because at least they can engage on the things that are important to them. Yep. So, there's never a lack of ways that people can engage. One of the things that I want to make sure folks are aware of is that participatory budgeting happens throughout the city, and it will begin to happen next year. Hopefully, if they're able to kick it off again this cycle. But that's an opportunity where folks on the ground can come together, and you can decide, where you would like a certain pot of money to be used, whether it's a rec center. I've seen people, put brand new basketball, hoops in and renovate, certain spaces and use those resources as the community decides. So there's different roles that I strongly encourage folks to play, because I do think that's going to be an issue. Now, Eli, a couple of years ago, when Mayor de Blasio took office, there was a committee, Latinos for Fair Representation, that was created by the late Angelo Falcon and a couple of community leaders to begin to highlight numbers about how many deputy mayors were appointed, how many commissioners in what office, how many high-level policy functioning people. There was a lot of information that was thrown out there, right? I feel like we have a roadmap here for, things that could be highlighted for the next incoming mayor. What are some of the things that we should be looking forward to when the mayor, when the new mayor comes into effect in January? What are some of the posts and some of the different roles, policymakers, that folks should be either advocating for or pushing, maybe even suggesting themselves, for these kind of positions? What should we be looking towards?
The first thing is making sure that there's fair representation across our city agencies and departments, right? I mean, if we look at some of the critical issues that we face in the city of New York, you know, on one hand, we have an increasing crime, right, rate, and we know that behind that is, right, crime is a result of something more profound, and we need to make sure that that is being dealt with as well, right? So, but we have a crime situation that needs to be dealt with, but it needs to be dealt with in the right way. I say that because, you know, who we have as a police commissioner will be important. So I think, again, there should be right representation across the board. But let's look at who the new police commissioner is going to be. Let's look at here's Lucia, and you know this very well. The deputy mayor of operations is that's like really the first person that the new incoming mayor is going to look at will be that deputy mayor of operations, because essentially that person is the go-to day-to-day person that is overseeing the work of all these different departments and agencies. So that's going to be the first role. The police commissioner is going to be another one. We have to look at who our the homeless services, right? The human resources administration. Who's gonna cover these departments and agencies that deal with these critical issues, right? Because, like, for instance, human resources, right? That's all our social services components is being run by that operation there, by that department, by that agency. So I think we got to look at, again, fair representation, but especially these roles that have play such a critical role in what happens around our city.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, it's so interesting because, you know, the reality is that there's an appointments officer, right? Someone responsible for the mayor's office to be able to appoint folks. And so we should be looking at, well, who's really going to be, because there's a saying, right, in Spanish, dime con quien andas y te diré quién eres, right? So there is a reality that if your niche is this small, then you're going to see the people surrounding you, and the people surrounding you are the ones that are going to refer people to you. I'm saying, you know, for those of you that are out there that want to be part of, you know, making change happen in a new cycle, right, and a new mayorship, then put your names out there. Don't be shy, right? Like, don't be shy. You may actually be able to help us execute great increases, because at the end of the day, the only reason why representation even matters in these spaces is to ensure that we're able to create any significant amount of change for the better in people's lives, right? We talked about, you know, opening up CUNY and the kind of funding that CUNY needed in order for money not to be an issue to obtain higher education, right? So that doesn't stop. So I hope, and I'll be honest with you, I'm waiting to see the numbers. I hope that the data shows that more Latinos are getting 4-year degrees, that more Latinos are perhaps getting into paths of employment, that whether it's a trade, let's say they choose not to do higher education, it is a trade, that we're going down the path of trying to become more economically stable, right? Because the reality is that if every day, you know, we're just continually struggling, I think both you and I, Eli, can stop talking, right, about the importance of having, you know, leadership, and start figuring out, well, you know, opening ourselves up. I'm open, right? I'm willing to say, if you or someone you know would like to be part of change makers, reach out to Eli, reach out to me, right? I'm willing to put together a list, right, Eli? We've talked about this. I'm willing to, like, you know, help as much as possible to say, I know I'm not going to do it because I feel like there's a role that I play. Not everyone could be an elected official. Not everyone could be the chair of your community board. Not everyone is going to be the district manager of the community board, but there's so many different ways that someone can participate. And I just want to encourage folks to reach out to organizations, in your neighborhood. Reach out to Critica.nyc. Let us know that you're interested in being a change maker, and let's try to refer you to the right folks, because at the end of the day, Eli, we really need, as much as possible, to have people in the right roles, to have people in the right positions. So, Eli, I want to invite you. Is there anything you think folks should know, that would help them really understand, how to reach out to you, right? And how to potentially that they can both engage with you, or even, make you think about ways that we can be involved together.
Yeah. Well, the first thing is, and I'm glad you have emphasized this on your program today. The first thing is to know that you can make a change, right? Like, your involvement is critical, and I think that's the first step, right? For people to realize that, because a lot of folks, again, they don't realize that they can make a difference, that they can contribute to not just their well-being, but the well-being of their neighbors. So that's the first step. Someone like Lucia, myself, we will know how that can possibly be done, and I'm easily available through social media, and Eli Valentin, NY, at Twitter, as well as on Facebook, and accessible that way. But yes, I mean, if that is a vehicle, and there are folks that we want to make sure that we empower others to know that they can make a difference, and we'll know how to make it happen. But the first thing is knowing that you can do it simply by participating, simply by engaging, and things can happen that way.
Now, I got Eli Valentin NY. That's for your Twitter handle. So yeah. For anyone who's on Twitter, feel free to do that. I'm sure you can grab Eli on Facebook. You can do so. You can definitely reach out to Critica NYC on our Instagram, on our Facebook, and leave a comment on our Facebook program, because the reality is that I know everyone here can truly make a difference and have a real say in the changes that come before us. And Eli, I know this is not going to be the last time that we have you on the program. So I want to thank you so much. I know that I'll be diving into some worker issues and some dynamics as people go back into our school system. But I really do hope you stay safe. And I want to welcome everyone to reach out to either of us, because we really want to be part of the change with you all. So thank you so much, Eli.
Thank you, Lucia. Thank you.
All right. Have a good evening.
You too.